not stand for this disgrace. He will not betray us. Enough. The war ends with me. There is nothing left to win. Then I will finish it. Chidera! Ah! Chidera! Stop! I am not your enemy. I will not fight you.
For one breathtaking heartbeat, the forest held its breath. Prince Chidera stood at the edge of the smoke-filled clearing, his fingers tightening around the polished spear General Alaezi had entrusted to him days before. Around him, the towering iroko trees swayed as though even the ancient forest sensed that history was about to be written beneath their branches. Then it came. A deafening roar rolled through the woods. Not thunder, hooves, hundreds of them. The earth trembled so violently that loose stones danced across the ground. Birds exploded from the treetops in frightened clouds, their frantic cries swallowed by the relentless pounding of the approaching cavalry. Dry leaves spiraled through the air while frightened deer burst from the undergrowth, fleeing blindly from the terror racing toward them. Across the clearing, General Alaezi never blinked. His weathered eyes remained fixed on the forest ahead. "They're faster than I expected," he murmured. Beside him, Prince Chidera calmly watched the tree line. "They want us afraid." The old general allowed himself the faintest nod. "They're about to be disappointed." Without another word, he slowly raised his sword. Far above, hidden among the thick branches of the ancient iroko trees, 36 royal archers silently lifted their bows as one. Not a single arrow had yet been drawn. Every man waited. Every heartbeat counted. The enemy commander finally emerged from the shadows. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, dozens of mounted warriors burst through the forest like a flood breaking a dam. Their horses charged across the clearing, muscles rippling beneath sweat-darkened hides as black banners whipped violently in the wind. Behind them, more riders, and behind those, even more. The army seemed endless. Emeka watched from the mouth of the Black Iroko Pass as villagers hurried past him. Women carried sleeping children. Old men leaned heavily on younger shoulders. Hunters formed protective lines around them. Yet even while leading the evacuation, Emeka's eyes never left the battlefield. His grip tightened around his spear. He hated leaving. Every instinct in him screamed to stay and fight beside Chidera. As though sensing his thoughts, Mazio Keki placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "Your duty is here." Emeka lowered his head. "I know, but my heart, it will return," his father replied quietly. "If those men succeed." Emeka looked back one final time. Far across the clearing, Prince Chidera stood unmoving, completely alone at the front, General Alaezi half a step behind him. Neither man flinched. Neither stepped back. It was no longer the posture of a prince guarded by his commander. It was the posture of two leaders prepared to die together if necessary. The enemy cavalry slowed. A rider emerged from their ranks. His horse advanced several paces before stopping. The stranger. The same cloaked man whose words had shaken the forest only moments before. His hood was lowered now, revealing the calm, unreadable face that General Alaezi knew all too well. He surveyed the clearing with quiet amusement. "So," his voice carried easily across the battlefield. "You've chosen to stand." Chidera answered before the general could. "I've chosen to protect." The stranger smiled faintly. "There is a difference." "There is." And today, Chidera planted the butt of his spear firmly into the earth. "You will learn it." Silence settled once more. The stranger slowly lifted one hand. Behind him, Hundreds of horsemen lowered their spears in perfect unison. General Alaezi inhaled deeply, then shouted with all the strength his aging lungs could summon. Archers. 36 bowstrings stretched tight. The forest itself seemed to groan beneath the tension. The stranger's hand dropped. Charge. The world exploded. The first volley of arrows descended like a storm. A deafening hiss tore through the morning air as 36 royal archers released in perfect unison. The shafts plunged into the charging cavalry with terrifying precision. Riders were thrown from their saddles. Horses screamed and reared violently. Spears flew from startled hands as the front line collapsed into chaos. But the army behind them never slowed. They simply rode over the fallen. General Alaezi's eyes narrowed. Again, another wave of arrows darkened the sky. This time the enemy was ready. Shields rose above their heads like the shell of a giant beast. Arrows splintered against wood and iron, though many still found their mark. Several horses tumbled, rolling across the clearing and throwing their riders into the advancing ranks. Yet still, they came. The thunder of hooves shook every branch in the forest. Chidera watched carefully. Not the men, the formation. "They're trying to split us," he said quietly. General Alaezi glanced sideways. "You see it? The center is only bait." The old commander smiled despite the danger. "Good." His expression hardened. "Then tell me what comes next." For only a heartbeat, Chidera remained silent. His father's tutors had taught him military theory. General Alaezi had taught him discipline. But today, the battlefield itself became his final teacher. His eyes swept across the enemy ranks. The center charged recklessly. The flanks were slower, waiting. Then he saw it. They're surrounding the pass. General Alaezi followed his gaze. Sure enough, nearly 100 mounted warriors had quietly broken away, disappearing behind the trees on both sides. Their target was no longer the clearing. It was the fleeing villagers. Without hesitation, Chidera turned. "Signal the forest guards." One of the hidden archers immediately blew a short blast on his horn. Far inside the Black Iroko Pass, Emeka froze. 3 sharp horn calls. The emergency signal. His heart sank. "They're coming around us." Every hunter instantly understood. Without waiting for orders, they abandoned the center of the trail and rushed toward the narrow cliffs overlooking the pass. Massive boulders had rested there for centuries. The hunters had prepared them days earlier. Emeka planted his shoulder against the largest. Push! 6 hunters joined him. Veins bulged across their arms. The ancient stone resisted. Then, it moved. A deep, grinding rumble echoed through the cliffs. The enormous boulder lurched forward before plunging down the steep slope. Seconds later, crash. The earth exploded beneath the first enemy riders attempting to enter the pass. Horses screamed as stone and dust engulfed the narrow trail. Several riders disappeared beneath the avalanche while those behind them struggled to stop, colliding violently with one another. Emeka wasted no time. Again, more rocks, more thunder. The mountains themselves seemed to join the battle. Back in the clearing, the stranger watched everything unfold. His calm smile never faded. "You trained him well." General Alaezi didn't answer. "He thinks beyond the sword now," the stranger continued. "He sees the battlefield. He sees his people." The general replied. "There is a difference." The stranger chuckled softly. "So there is." Then, he slowly drew his own sword. Its blade caught the morning sun with an eerie silver glow. "I suppose," he stepped forward, "I shall have to test him, myself." The moment his foot touched the clearing, every hunter felt it. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. General Alaezi lowered his stance. His grip tightened. "No one interferes," he said quietly. Chidera looked at him. "General, this battle belongs to the army." The old commander's eyes never left the stranger. "But this man," he slowly raised his sword, "belongs to me." The stranger smiled. "I was wondering how long it would take before you challenged me yourself." Around them, the battle continued to rage. Steel clashed. Horses screamed. Arrows flew, yet an invisible circle seemed to form between the two aging warriors. Even enemy soldiers instinctively kept their distance, because they recognized something terrible. This was no ordinary duel. This was a confrontation 25 years in the making, and before either blade could move, a young voice shattered the silence. No. General Ezeobi turned. Prince Chidera stepped forward. His expression was calm, resolute. This fight, he lowered his spear into a ready stance, is mine too. The battlefield seemed to freeze. Prince Chidera stepped forward until he stood shoulder to shoulder with General Ezeobi. His spear rested low, its polished blade catching the first rays of the morning sun as smoke curled lazily between them. General Ezeobi's eyes hardened. No. His voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of a commander. You are the future of Alaezi. Chidera never looked away from the stranger. And because I am, he tightened his grip on the spear. I cannot ask others to fight battles I refuse to face myself. The old general exhaled slowly. For a fleeting moment, he saw not the frightened boy he had trained in the palace courtyard years ago, but the man standing before him now. The boy was gone. The prince remained. The leader had arrived. The stranger watched them with quiet amusement. There he is. His smile widened. The child the prophecy spoke of. A ripple of unease spread through the hunters. Prophecy. Again. General Ezeobi lowered his sword slightly. You will not poison his mind. The stranger laughed. Poison? His voice echoed across the battlefield. I intend to free it. Without warning, he pointed his sword directly at Chidera. Tell me, Prince. When you were 10 years old? Chidera frowned. Did you ever wonder why your father suddenly dismissed every tutor except one? The question struck him like an unexpected blow. He remembered. There had been many tutors. Then one day, almost all of them disappeared. Only General Ezeobi remained. The stranger continued. When you were 12. Enough, General Ezeobi thundered. The stranger ignored him. Did you ever wonder why the palace western tower was declared forbidden to you? Another memory surfaced. The tower. Every servant had avoided speaking about it. Whenever he approached, he had always been redirected elsewhere. The stranger took another slow step. You obeyed because you trusted your parents. His eyes narrowed. But children, he smiled sadly, always know when adults are hiding something. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Chidera's face. Not because he believed the stranger, but because the memories were real. Behind them, the battle raged without mercy. Hunters leapt from fallen logs, bringing riders crashing from their horses. Royal archers continued firing from the treetops with deadly precision. Emeka and his hunters held the entrance to the Black Iroko Pass with desperate determination. The villagers were almost through. Almost. Then, a terrified cry pierced the forest. Help! Everyone turned. A little girl, no older than 6, had stumbled on the rocky path. She fell. Before anyone could reach her, 3 enemy riders broke through the hunter's line. They saw her. Their horses charged straight toward the child. Neka screamed. Chioma. Time seemed to stop. The little girl tried to stand. Her foot slipped again. The horses were almost upon her. Without thinking, Chidera moved. General Ezeobi shouted after him, Chidera? But the prince was already running, not away from danger, toward it. He sprinted across the clearing with astonishing speed, weaving between battling soldiers as arrows hissed past his head. One rider lowered his spear. Another drew a curved blade. Neither slowed. They intended to trample the child. The distance vanished. 20 steps. 15. 10. 5. At the very last instant, Chidera threw himself forward. He wrapped both arms around the little girl and rolled across the ground just as the first horse thundered past. Its iron-shod hoof missed Chioma's head by mere inches. The second rider wheeled sharply, raising his sword. Before it could fall, thwack! An arrow buried itself deep in the rider's shoulder. He screamed and toppled from the saddle. High above, one of the royal archers calmly reached for another arrow. The third rider, never even saw Emeka. The young hunter burst from behind a massive iroko tree with the speed of a leopard. His spear drove cleanly into the horseman's chest. The impact hurled both men from their feet. Emeka rolled once, snatched up his weapon, and stood over the fallen rider, breathing hard, alive. He looked toward Chidera. The prince still held little Chioma safely in his arms. For a brief moment, the two young men locked eyes across the chaos. No words were needed, only understanding. Then Emeka grinned. "Don't just stand there, Your Highness." He pointed toward the fleeing villagers. "Get her to safety." For the first time since the battle began, Chidera smiled, a genuine smile. He gently lifted the frightened child into his arms and ran toward Nneka, who collapsed to her knees as she embraced the little girl, tears streaming down her face. General Ezeobi watched the entire scene. His heart swelled with pride. The greatest lesson he had ever taught Chidera echoed in his mind. A king is never measured by the enemies he defeats, but by the lives he refuses to abandon. The old commander slowly smiled, then turned back toward the stranger. His eyes burned like fire. "You wanted to test him." He raised his sword once more. "You've just witnessed your answer." General Ezeobi lowered his stance, his polished sword gleaming beneath the shafts of golden light piercing through the towering iroko trees. Around him, the battle continued with relentless fury. Steel clashed against steel. Horses screamed. Hunters darted between the undergrowth with the speed and precision of men defending the only home they had ever known. Yet within the smoke-filled clearing, a strange silence settled. The stranger's eyes remained fixed on Chidera. He smiled not with triumph, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition. "You see?" he said quietly. "I told you." He gestured toward the prince. He cannot ignore suffering. General Ezeobi's expression hardened. "Compassion is not weakness." "No," the stranger agreed. "It is exactly what makes him dangerous." Chidera stepped forward, the tip of his spear pointing squarely at the stranger's chest. "You speak in riddles." The stranger chuckled. "Only because the truth has been hidden from you your entire life." Another rider charged toward the clearing, only to be struck from his horse by two royal arrows fired in perfect succession. Neither man looked away. The battle had become little more than distant thunder. "I asked you a question," Chidera said firmly. "What prophecy?" The stranger's smile slowly faded. For the first time, his voice carried no mockery, only memory. 26 years ago, even General Ezeobi stiffened. "Before you were born." The forest itself seemed to listen. The royal priests climbed the sacred hill of Nukwu Udo. Chidera frowned. He had heard the name only once as a child. It was said to be the oldest place of prayer in Alaezi. No ordinary person was ever allowed there. "The stars disappeared that night," the stranger continued, "not because clouds covered them." He looked toward the brightening sky, but because the heavens themselves mourned. A cold breeze swept through the clearing. The eldest priest entered the sacred shrine alone. When he emerged, the stranger's voice became almost a whisper. His hair had turned completely white. Several hunters exchanged uneasy glances. Even the enemy soldiers nearest them seemed unwilling to interrupt. The priest delivered only one prophecy. He slowly raised one finger. "A son shall be born beneath the lion moon." A second finger. "He shall unite the broken lands." A third. "He shall save Alaezi." The stranger paused. His eyes locked onto Chidera's. "By destroying the kingdom it has become." Silence. Absolute silence. Even the clash of battle seemed to disappear. Chidera blinked. "I don't understand." "You were never meant to," the stranger replied. The king made certain of that. General Ezeobi finally stepped forward. "Enough." His voice was calm, but there was anger beneath it. "You've twisted those words for 25 years. The stranger looked at him. "Have I?" "You conveniently forgot the final line." For the first time, the stranger's confidence faltered, only slightly. General Ezeobi's eyes blazed. The prophecy never ended there. He turned toward Chidera. You deserve the whole truth. The prince stood frozen. Every answer he had sought, every secret hidden since childhood, was finally within reach. The old commander took a long breath. Then, slowly, he spoke the words he had guarded for 25 years. Only the one who chooses love over power. His voice echoed beneath the ancient trees. Shall wear the crown without destroying the people beneath it. The stranger closed his eyes, almost as though hearing those words caused him pain. General Eziobi continued. The prophecy never said you would destroy Alaezi. It warned that any ruler who loved power more than people, he looked toward the burning battlefield, would destroy it. The realization struck Chidera like lightning. So that's why. He looked at the stranger. You've hunted me all these years. The stranger slowly opened his eyes. They believed you were the answer. His voice had become heavy. I believed you were the beginning of another tragedy. He tightened his grip around his sword. I vowed that no child, no matter how innocent, would ever have the chance to become another tyrant. General Eziobi's face darkened. You stopped protecting the kingdom. You began judging children for crimes they had not committed. The stranger's jaw clenched. I judged history. No. The general shook his head. You judged fear. For the first time since they had met, the stranger had no answer. Only silence. Then, a horn sounded from the eastern ridge. One blast, then another. General Eziobi turned sharply. His expression changed instantly. The battle had just become far worse. The first horn blast rolled across the forest like distant thunder. Then came the second. Longer, urgent. General Eziobi's face drained of color. No, his voice was barely audible. It cannot be. Prince Chidera looked toward the eastern ridge where the sound had come from. Through the drifting smoke, figures appeared atop the rocky cliffs overlooking the battlefield. Not enemy cavalry, royal soldiers, dozens of them. Their crimson and gold standards fluttered proudly against the morning sky. For a heartbeat, relief swept through the hunters. The palace army, one shouted. We're saved. But General Eziobi did not smile. Instead, his grip tightened around his sword. The stranger watched the approaching soldiers with an unreadable expression. They're early. His words made Chidera's heart skip. You were expecting them? The stranger answered calmly. I was expecting him. Before Chidera could ask what he meant, another horn echoed through the valley. This one, different, deeper, older. Every royal soldier on the ridge immediately stopped. Every hunter froze. Even the enemy horsemen hesitated. General Eziobi slowly closed his eyes. I know that horn. His voice trembled for the first time in decades. It only sounds when. He never finished the sentence. From the center of the advancing royal formation, a magnificent white stallion emerged. Its mane flowed like silver beneath the rising sun. Upon its back sat an elderly man wearing simple travel robes instead of royal armor. His face was hidden beneath a hood. Yet the moment General Eziobi saw him, the old commander dropped to one knee. Every royal archer hidden among the trees followed instantly. Then every palace soldier, one after another, they knelt. Confusion spread across the battlefield. Hunters stared in disbelief. Enemy riders exchanged uneasy glances. Even Emiko whispered, Who is that? The stranger's smile disappeared completely. So, he murmured. He came himself. The rider finally reached the edge of the clearing. Without haste, he dismounted. His movements were steady despite his age. He lowered his hood. The entire forest gasped. King Obiora, the king of Alaezi. He had come to the battlefield himself, not surrounded by luxury, not carried in a royal carriage. He stood as a father, as a king, as a man who had refused to remain safely behind palace walls while others bled for his son. Chidera stared in complete shock. Father. The king looked at him. For several moments, neither spoke. Emotion filled the king's eyes as he took in the sight before him. His son stood covered in dust. His clothes were torn. A shallow cut marked one cheek. His hands bore fresh wounds. He looked nothing like the prince who had left the palace. He looked like a man. The king's gaze slowly shifted toward General Eziobi. "My old friend," he said softly. "You've kept your promise." General Eziobi lowered his head. "With everything I had." King Obiora nodded once. "I knew you would." Then, his eyes settled upon the stranger. The warmth vanished. Only sorrow remained. "So?" the king said quietly. "It has finally come to this." The stranger offered a respectful bow. Not mocking, not fearful, respectful. It was always destined to. The king's shoulders sagged. "No." His voice carried immense sadness. "It was never destiny. It was your choice." A heavy silence followed. Chidera looked from one man to the other. His heart pounded. "You know each other." Neither answered immediately. Instead, the king took one slow step forward, then another, until only a few paces separated them. When he finally spoke, his words struck the clearing like lightning. "Tell me, my brother." His voice cracked. "How did we become enemies?" The forest fell completely silent. General Eziobi shut his eyes. The hunters looked at one another in stunned disbelief. Emeka lowered his spear. Urenna, watching from the entrance of the Black Iroko Pass, covered her mouth in shock. "Brother?" The stranger, the man who had hunted Prince Chidera for 25 years. The man who had ordered villages burned. The man who stood at the center of the prophecy was the king's own brother. The words lingered in the air like smoke. "My brother." For a long moment, no one moved. The battlefield itself seemed to forget there was a war. Hunters lowered their spears. Royal archers loosened their bowstrings. Even the enemy horsemen glanced uncertainly toward one another. Prince Chidera's mind refused to accept what he had just heard. Brother? His father had no brother. Or at least, that was what he had believed all his life. Slowly, he turned toward General Eziobi. The old commander's silence answered the question before his lips could. It was true. King Obiora's eyes never left the cloaked stranger. "So many years," he whispered. "So many graves. So much hatred." The stranger looked at him calmly. "I buried my hatred long ago." "No." The king's voice trembled. "You buried your mercy." The stranger sighed. "I wondered how long it would take before you said that." Chidera stepped forward. His voice was almost pleading. "Father." The king looked at him. "Who is he?" Another painful silence followed. Then King Obiora answered. "He was born. Prince Obinna." A wave of murmurs swept through both armies. The name still lived in old songs, in forgotten stories. Among the oldest elders of Alaezi, the king's younger brother, the prince who had disappeared before Chidera was born. No one had ever spoken of him again. The stranger smiled sadly. "I see you finally remembered my name." General Eziobi lowered his head. "There has not been a day that I forgot it." Prince Obinna looked toward him. "I know." His expression softened for the first time. "You searched for me for 11 years. I searched every kingdom west of the Great River. I searched the northern deserts. I searched the southern coast. I even searched among the mountain clans." His voice cracked. "I buried an empty coffin because I believed you were dead." Obinna closed his eyes. "I wish I had been." The battlefield had become a courtroom. No swords moved, no arrows flew. Only truth remained. King Obiora slowly walked closer. "When our father died," he began quietly, "he left the throne to me." Obinna nodded once. "He did. I begged you to stay." "You did." "I offered you half the kingdom to govern." "You did." "I asked you to stand beside me." "Again." "You did." Chidera frowned. "Then why did you leave?" Obinna finally looked at him. "Because." He drew a slow breath. "I saw what no one else wanted to see." His eyes turned toward the palace soldiers, then toward the hunters, then toward the villagers huddled near Black Iroko Pass. "I watched greedy nobles grow stronger. I watched innocent farmers lose their land. I watched corrupt chiefs grow rich while villages starved." His voice became heavier. And every time I warned the royal council, he looked at the king. They called me impatient. King Obiora lowered his eyes. I know. They told me to wait. I know. They said change takes time. I know. Obinna's voice suddenly thundered across the clearing. But children were dying while they waited. The words echoed through the forest. No one answered, because everyone knew he was not entirely wrong. Prince Chidera slowly lowered his spear. He remembered. Villages neglected. Hungry families. Corrupt nobles his father had spent years removing from power. The reforms had come, but slowly, very slowly, Obinna continued. So, I sought answers elsewhere. General Ezeobi's face darkened. The prophecy. Obinna nodded. I climbed the sacred hill. I stood before the same shrine. I heard the same prophecy. His expression became haunted. But his voice fell to almost a whisper. I listened with a heart already poisoned by disappointment. He looked directly at Chidera. I heard what I wanted to hear. I convinced myself that if one child could someday destroy the old kingdom, then perhaps the old kingdom deserved to fall. The forest became deathly still, and that, General Ezeobi said quietly, was the moment you stopped serving Alaezi. Obinna's eyes filled with sorrow. No, he looked toward the burning battlefield. It was the moment. I stopped believing Alaezi could save itself. King Obiora stepped closer until only a sword's length separated the two brothers. When Mother died, he asked softly, "Why didn't you come home?" For the first time, Prince Obinna broke. His shoulders trembled. His eyes glistened. I did. Everyone stared. I came. His voice cracked. I stood outside the palace walls. I watched the funeral from the hills. He swallowed hard. I wanted to walk through those gates. More than anything. He looked at his brother. But after everything I had already done, I no longer believed I deserved to. A tear escaped down the king's cheek. General Ezeobi quietly closed his eyes. Even the hardest hunters looked away, because at that moment, the feared enemy before them was no longer simply a villain. He was a man who had allowed grief, disappointment, and bitterness to consume everything he had once loved. Then, Prince Chidera took one slow step forward. His voice was calm, but you still chose to burn villages. You still ordered innocent people killed. You still hunted children. Silence. Obinna could not deny it. The weight of those crimes settled upon him like chains. Finally, he lowered his head. Yes, he whispered. And for that, he slowly raised his sword. I deserve whatever judgment awaits me. The battle was no longer about a prophecy. It was about justice. And everyone knew. The final confrontation could no longer be avoided. The clearing stood silent, not because the battle had ended, but because every man present understood that the next few moments would decide the fate of Alaezi far more than any sword ever could. Prince Obinna slowly lowered his blade. The fierce conviction that had driven him for 25 years no longer burned in his eyes with the same certainty. Instead, there was exhaustion. Deep, soul-weary exhaustion. King Obiora stepped toward his younger brother until only a few paces separated them. Around them, soldiers from both sides instinctively lowered their weapons. Even the horses stood strangely still, their nervous snorts the only sounds breaking the silence. The king spoke first. When father died, his voice was calm. He told me something I have never forgotten. Obinna remained silent. He said, the king's eyes became distant. A crown is not a reward. It is a burden. The day it becomes a prize, the kingdom is already lost. Obinna slowly closed his eyes. I remember. You were there. I was. You heard the same words. I did. The king looked at him sadly. So tell me, little brother. His voice cracked. When did you stop believing them? For several heartbeats. Obinna could not answer. Finally, I stopped believing. He whispered, the day I watched hungry children begging outside the palace gates, while corrupt nobles feasted inside. Silence. I pleaded for change. I begged the council. I begged you. His eyes met the king's. And every answer I received was tomorrow. His voice suddenly rose. But hunger does not wait for tomorrow. Neither the king nor General Eziobi interrupted, because there was truth in his pain. General Eziobi slowly nodded. You were right. Everyone looked toward him. You were right to be angry. Obinna looked surprised. You were right to demand justice. The old general's voice remained steady. You were right to challenge corruption. Then, his eyes hardened. But the moment you chose to murder innocent people, he pointed toward the frightened villagers gathered near the Black Iroko Pass. You became the very evil you swore to destroy. Those words struck Obinna harder than any blade. He turned slowly. For the first time, he truly looked. He saw children clinging to frightened mothers. He saw old men supporting wounded hunters. He saw smoke rising from the direction of villages he himself had ordered burned. He saw fear. Not in soldiers, in ordinary people, exactly the people he had once vowed to protect. His breathing became uneven. My lord, one of his own captains stepped forward cautiously. We still outnumber them. If we strike now, we can still win. Obinna looked at the captain, then toward the battlefield. Victory. The word suddenly felt empty. Win. What? More graves? More widows? More orphaned children? He lowered his head. What have I become? He whispered. Prince Chidera slowly stepped forward. General Eziobi instinctively reached out. My prince. But Chidera gently shook his head. It's all right. He stopped only a few feet from his uncle. Neither carried hatred in their eyes now, only sadness. You said, Chidera began quietly, that you feared I would become another tyrant. Obinna nodded. I did. You watched me choose villagers over my own safety. I did. You watched me refuse to abandon strangers. I did. You heard the complete prophecy. I did. Chidera took one final step. Then answer me honestly. His voice was almost gentle. Do you still believe? I am the child you came here to kill? The question shattered something inside Obinna. His hands trembled. His sword suddenly felt impossibly heavy. He looked into his nephew's eyes. Not the eyes of a prince. Not the eyes of a future king. The eyes of the boy he had spent 25 years fearing. Slowly, very slowly, his fingers opened. Clang. The sword struck the earth. Its sound echoed across the clearing. Obinna dropped to both knees. Tears filled his eyes. I was wrong. The words barely escaped his lips. I was wrong. His shoulders shook. For 25 years, I believed I was saving Alaezi. He looked toward the frightened villagers, but all I ever did was teach it to fear. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to mourn with him. King Obiora walked forward. General Eziobi instinctively tensed, but the king raised one hand. No, he stopped before his kneeling brother. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, instead of drawing his sword, the king embraced him. The battlefield gasped. Obinna broke completely. 25 years of bitterness, 25 years of guilt, 25 years of loneliness, poured out in tears upon his brother's shoulder. General Eziobi quietly wiped his own eyes. Behind him, even hardened hunters lowered their heads. Prince Chidera smiled faintly, not because the battle had been won, but because something far greater had happened. Hatred had finally surrendered. The echo of the fallen sword lingered across the clearing. No one breathed. No one spoke. Prince Obinna remained on his knees, his head bowed as King Obiora embraced the brother he had mourned for 25 years. For one fragile moment, it seemed the war had ended. Then a furious cry shattered the silence. No. Every head turned. The captain who had spoken moments earlier rode forward, his horse stamping violently against the forest floor. His face burned with rage. You cannot surrender. He pointed accusingly at Obinna. We have fought for 25 years. We buried fathers. We buried sons. We burned our own homes because you promised a new kingdom. His voice rose until it echoed through the trees. And now, you ask us to kneel? Several of Obinna's commanders raised their weapons. One after another, more soldiers followed. The clearing that had begun to breathe again suddenly tightened with danger. General Eziobi immediately stepped in front of the king. Royal archers drew fresh arrows. Hunters raised their spears. The fragile peace teetered on the edge of collapse. Obinna slowly rose to his feet. No, his voice was calm. The captain ignored him. We can still win. Obinna shook his head. There is nothing left to win. The captain's expression twisted with disbelief. They murdered our brothers. They defended their homes, Obinna replied. They protected their families. They obeyed their king. His voice grew stronger. And he looked across the battlefield, led you down the wrong path. The captain spat onto the ground. I did not march here to hear apologies. He raised his sword. I marched to finish this war. With a roar, he charged. Dozens of loyal riders surged behind him. General Eziobi lifted his blade. Archers, wait! The command thundered across the battlefield. Everyone froze. It had come from Chidera. The prince stepped forward alone. He planted his spear firmly into the earth. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, he removed his hand from the weapon. He stood before the charging cavalry, unarmed. Chidera! The king shouted. General Eziobi took a step forward. My prince! But Chidera never moved. His voice carried clearly across the clearing. Look at me. The charging riders hesitated. If you strike now, you will not be killing enemies. He pointed toward the frightened villagers. You will be killing children. He turned toward the wounded soldiers lying on both sides of the battlefield. You will be killing men who have already suffered enough. Finally, he looked directly at the furious captain. And when the sun sets today, tell me, what kingdom will remain for you to rule? The captain's horse slowed. Only slightly. Chidera continued. You followed your commander because you believed you were saving Alaezi. So did my soldiers. So did these hunters. So did every man standing in this forest. He spread his arms. Must every father here die? Before we admit we all wanted the same thing? The words struck the riders harder than any arrow. One soldier lowered his spear, then another. A third removed his helmet. The captain looked behind him. The certainty that had carried him into battle was slipping away. His own men were no longer looking at Chidera. They were looking at the bodies scattered across the clearing. Friends, brothers, fathers. Enough. At last, the captain slowly lowered his sword. It slipped from his fingers and fell into the grass. One by one, the remaining riders did the same. The forest fell silent once more. General Eziobi stared at Chidera in quiet amazement. Then he smiled. So, he whispered to himself, this is what the prophecy meant. Not a king who conquered by the sword. A king who ended a war without lifting one, for the first time in many years. The forest of whispering woods knew silence. Not the silence born of fear, but the quiet that follows a storm. Smoke drifted lazily through the towering iroko trees as hunters moved carefully across the battlefield, helping the wounded regardless of which side they had fought on. Royal physicians knelt beside injured soldiers. Village women carried gourds of water from a nearby stream. Even men who had crossed blades only moments before now worked together to lift fallen horses and clear broken wagons from the clearing. Prince Chidera watched them in thoughtful silence. General Eziobi stepped beside him. They're helping one another. Chidera nodded. They've remembered they were countrymen before they were enemies. The old commander smiled. You've already begun healing, Alaezi. Nearby, Prince Obinna stood beneath an ancient iroko tree. His hands were bound not roughly, but respectfully, with a strip of royal cloth. King Obiora had refused to have his brother chained in iron. He will answer for his crimes, the king had said. But he will answer as a prince of Alaezi. Obinna accepted the restraint without resistance. He had spent 25 years running. He was tired, very tired. A sudden cry broke the quiet. Mother! Little Chioma, the girl Chidera had rescued, ran across the clearing carrying a small bundle of wild forest flowers. She stopped before Chidera and looked up with wide, grateful eyes. My mother said heroes receive gifts. The prince knelt before her. You should keep them. The little girl shook her head stubbornly. No. She gently pressed the flowers into his hand. They belong to you. A warm smile spread across Chidera's face. Thank you. The child leaned forward and hugged him tightly before running back toward her family. General Azeobi chuckled softly. I've seen kings receive gold. He looked at the tiny bouquet, but I don't think I've ever seen a greater reward. Near the entrance of the Black Iroko Pass, Urenna stood quietly beside her parents. Her eyes never left Chidera. Neka smiled knowingly. You haven't looked away from him once. Urenna blushed. I was making sure he wasn't hurt. Emeka laughed. Of course. Mazio Keke folded his arms. She was making sure. The whole family laughed. Even after everything they had endured, they laughed. And for the first time in many days, it felt natural. General Azeobi called for everyone's attention. Hunters of Alaezi. Every conversation stopped. The old commander looked across the gathered villagers. I came to these forests, believing I would protect one prince. His eyes swept across Mazio Keke, Emeka, Neka, the hunters, and the villagers. I was wrong. He turned toward Chidera. I found an entire people protecting their future. A murmur of emotion swept through the crowd. The general continued. The king himself has ordered that every family whose home was destroyed shall have it rebuilt. The villagers gasped. Every child orphaned by this conflict shall be cared for by the crown. More tears appeared. And? He smiled toward Mazio Keke. No hunter who defended these forests shall ever again pay tax to the royal treasury. The hunters looked at one another in stunned disbelief. Then, cheers erupted through the clearing. Some laughed, some cried. Some simply fell to their knees in gratitude. King Obiora slowly approached Mazio Keke. The elderly hunter immediately bowed. The king gently stopped him. No. He placed both hands on the hunter's shoulders. It is I who owe you thanks. Mazio Keke looked up in surprise. You sheltered my son. You defended my people. You stood for justice when fear would have been easier. The king removed the royal leopard tooth pendant from around his own neck, a symbol worn only by the rulers of Alaezi. He placed it into Mazio Keke's weathered hands. Gasps echoed across the clearing. This is not payment, the king said. No king could ever repay what you have done. It is simply a reminder. He smiled warmly, that from this day forward, the House of Okeke shall forever be counted among the greatest friends of the royal house of Alaezi. Mazio Keke's eyes filled with tears. He bowed his head not to the king, but in humble gratitude to the ancestors who had guided him through the darkest days of his life. High above, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the whispering woods, almost as if the forest itself approved. The journey back to Alaezi lasted 3 days. 3 long days during which the roads that had once carried frightened refugees and marching soldiers were transformed into rivers of celebration. Messengers had raced ahead of the royal procession. Every village, every market, every farming settlement already knew the war was over. Prince Chidera had returned alive. As the royal company approached the capital, drums echoed from hill to hill. Women lined the roads with baskets of flowers, singing ancient songs of thanksgiving. Elders stood beneath decorated canopies, lifting their staffs in blessing as the procession passed. Children ran alongside the horses, laughing. Long live Prince Chidera! Long live the king! Long live Alaezi! For the first time in many years, hope had returned to the kingdom. Prince Obinna rode quietly beneath royal escort. His hands were bound not with chains, but with a simple strip of royal cloth. King Obiora had refused to parade his younger brother like a criminal. He will answer before the laws of Alaezi, the king had declared, but he will do so as my brother, and as a prince who lost his way. Obinna neither resisted nor complained. His greatest prison now was his own conscience. At last, The towering lion gates of the royal palace came into view. The great ceremonial horns sounded. Once, twice, then a third time. The enormous gates slowly swung open. The palace courtyard overflowed with nobles, servants, guards, and citizens. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, Queen Obianuju. Beside her stood Princess Adago, her hands tightly clasped together in anxious anticipation. Just behind them, Lady Somtochukwu. Her face remained composed, but her heart pounded. The moment Queen Obianuju saw the royal procession, her eyes searched only one face. Then she found him, her son, alive. Before anyone could announce the king's arrival, the queen descended the palace steps. Royal etiquette vanished. She crossed the courtyard almost at a run. Chidera, her voice broke. The prince stepped down from his horse just as his mother reached him. She wrapped both arms around him. My son. For several moments, she could not speak again. She simply held him, as though letting go might cause him to disappear once more. Chidera embraced her tightly. I'm home, mother. Tears streamed freely down the queen's face. She touched his hair, his cheeks, his shoulders, every scar, every bruise, every wound. You've become thinner. A small smile escaped Chidera. I believe everyone intends to tell me that. The queen laughed softly through her tears. You deserved every meal you missed. The courtyard erupted with gentle laughter. Only then did Queen Obianuju turn toward her husband. Without a word, she walked into King Obiora's embrace. The two stood together in silence. No speeches, no ceremony, just gratitude. General Ezeobi quietly looked away. Some moments belonged only to family. Suddenly, a familiar voice rang across the courtyard. Brother. Princess Adago could restrain herself no longer. She hurried down the remaining steps, her royal attendants struggling to keep up. The young princess threw her arms around Chidera. You impossible man. She laughed and cried at the same time. Do you know how many nights Mother and I stayed awake waiting for news? Chidera smiled warmly. I had a feeling. She stepped back just enough to look at him, then lightly struck his arm. Don't you ever frighten us like that again. I'll try. You'll do more than try. She narrowed her eyes playfully. You'll obey. Chidera laughed. Yes, Your Highness. She smiled triumphantly. Better. The entire courtyard burst into warm laughter. For a brief moment, the kingdom forgot it had ever known war. Then, Adago's eyes moved beyond her brother. She saw a familiar face standing quietly among the villagers. Urenna. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Princess Adago smiled. A genuine smile. She walked directly toward her. Urenna immediately bowed respectfully. Your Highness. Adago gently reached out and lifted her before she could remain bowed. You don't need to do that. Urenna looked up in surprise. It is good to see you again. Adago said softly. I only wish it were under happier circumstances. Emotion filled Urenna's eyes. So do I, Princess. Adago squeezed her hands gently. I heard everything. She smiled warmly. You were every bit as courageous as General Ezeobi said. Urenna lowered her gaze. I only did what I believed was right. I know, Adago replied, and that's exactly why I'm glad you're here. Standing several paces away, Lady Somtochukwu watched the exchange. Every smile directed toward Urenna, every word of praise, twisted like a knife inside her heart. Once, she had believed she would stand beside Prince Chidera. Now, the palace itself seemed to be welcoming the woman she had tried so desperately to destroy. Queen Obianuju observed everything. She noticed Adago's warmth toward Urenna. She noticed the respect General Ezeobi showed her. She noticed how even the king regarded the young woman with quiet gratitude. But the queen revealed nothing. Her expression remained calm, measured. At last, she spoke. General Ezeobi, my queen. Ensure the villagers are given proper accommodation within the palace guest quarters until their journey home can safely continue. It shall be done. She turned toward Mazio Keiki and Neka. You have the gratitude of this kingdom." The elderly couple bowed respectfully. Finally, her eyes rested on Urenna. Only for a moment. "Urenna." "Yes, Your Majesty. You will remain at the palace." A hush settled across the courtyard. No one could read the queen's face. "There are matters," she said quietly, "that remain unfinished between us." Without another word, she turned and ascended the palace steps. Princess Adago looked after her mother knowingly. Then she glanced at Urenna and offered the faintest, reassuring smile. General Eziobi exhaled slowly. He understood that look. The battle in the forest had ended, but another battle, one of hearts, tradition, and acceptance, was only just about to begin. Morning sunlight spilled through the carved palace windows, painting golden patterns across the polished floors of the queen's private audience chamber. The room was exactly as Urenna remembered it. The towering carved pillars, the embroidered royal banners, the fragrance of burning frankincense, the carved lion throne where Queen Obianuju sat with quiet authority. Months earlier, Urenna had entered this chamber with trembling hands and an uncertain heart. She had been a village maiden standing before the most powerful woman in Alaezi. Today, she entered differently, not because she feared less, but because life had taught her more. The palace attendant announced her arrival. "Your Majesty." Urenna, daughter of Mazio Keke. The great doors opened. Urenna stepped inside. She wore a beautifully woven but modest Ankara wrapper, gifted to her by the queen's attendants. Around her neck hung only the simple wooden pendant her mother had given her years ago. She had refused to replace it with jewels. It reminded her where she came from. She walked steadily across the chamber before bowing respectfully. "Your Majesty." Queen Obianuju regarded her in silence. Her face betrayed nothing. Only Princess Adago sat beside the queen this time. Lady Somtochukwu was noticeably absent. The silence stretched. Finally, the queen spoke. "Step forward." Those two words sent a shiver through Urenna. The queen rose from her throne and slowly descended the steps. She circled Urenna once, saying nothing, studying her, not her clothing, not her beauty, her bearing, the calm in her eyes, the quiet confidence in the way she stood. At last, the queen stopped in front of her. "When you first stood before me," she began, "I believed you were simply a village girl who had captured my son's attention." Urenna remained silent. I feared that affection had blinded his judgment. The queen looked directly into her eyes. "So I questioned you. I challenged you. I hoped," she smiled faintly, "that you would choose to walk away." Princess Adago lowered her eyes. She had never heard her mother admit this aloud. The queen continued, "But instead, you walked into danger. You shielded strangers. You stood beside my son when soldiers hunted him. You refused to abandon the weak. You carried burdens no one asked you to carry." She paused. "And when you could have sought safety, you chose sacrifice." Emotion welled in Urenna's eyes. "I only did what my parents taught me." Queen Obianuju nodded slowly. "Exactly." Silence settled once more. Then the queen asked the question she had carried in her heart since the Battle of Alaezi. "Tell me, Urenna, if tomorrow my son were no longer a prince, if the throne vanished, if the palace became nothing more than stone, would you still choose him?" Urenna did not hesitate. "I fell in love with the man I met in the Whispering Woods." She smiled softly at the memory. "I didn't even know he was a prince." A faint smile touched Princess Adago's lips. Urenna continued, "I loved the man who defended strangers, the man who listened before speaking, the man who chose my family over his own safety." She looked directly at the queen. "If all he had left were the clothes he wore, I would still walk beside him." The chamber fell silent. Queen Obianuju searched Urenna's face, looking for uncertainty, for ambition, for deception. She found none, only truth. Slowly, very slowly. The queen reached toward her own wrist. Princess Adago's eyes widened. She knew that bracelet. It was the royal coral bracelet presented to every queen of Alaezi on the day of her coronation. The queen removed it. She held it for a long moment. Then, she gently slipped it onto Urenna's wrist. Tears filled Urenna's eyes instantly. "The first time you stood before me," the queen said softly, "I measured your birth." She closed Urenna's fingers around the bracelet. "Today, I measure your character." Her voice broke with emotion. "And I have found it worthy." Urenna could no longer hold back her tears. She instinctively knelt. But before her knees touched the floor, Queen Obianuju reached down and lifted her into a warm embrace. "No," the queen whispered. "You will not kneel before me today." She held Urenna tightly. "From this day forward, you rise beside us." Princess Adago's own tears escaped as she watched. The answer she had prayed for had finally come. The queen stepped back, smiling through her tears. Then, with the authority of a mother and a queen, she declared, "Send for the king, and send for Prince Chidera. It is time to begin preparing a royal wedding." The news spread through the palace like the first rains after a long drought. The queen had accepted Urenna. Servants smiled as they hurried through the corridors. Palace guards exchanged knowing glances. Even the cooks in the royal kitchens sang while preparing the evening meal. Only one person looked happier than everyone else: Princess Adago. She found Chidera standing alone beneath the palace's ancient udala tree, gazing toward the distant forests beyond the palace walls. "So," she said with a teasing smile, "my brother has finally stopped pretending." Chidera turned, laughing softly. "Pretending about what?" "That you weren't hopelessly in love." He shook his head. "You've been spending too much time around Mother." Adago folded her arms. "Oh no, I've been spending too much time watching you." She leaned closer. "You looked at Urenna exactly the way Father looks at Mother." Chidera laughed. "Did I?" "Worse. You didn't even realize you were doing it." Both laughed together. For a brief moment, they were no longer prince and princess, just brother and sister. Adago's smile slowly softened. "I'm proud of you." Chidera looked at her. "You came back different. I hope that's a good thing." "It is." She nodded. "You left as my brother." She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You came home as the man who will one day wear our father's crown." Emotion flickered across Chidera's face. He embraced his sister warmly. "Thank you." Later that afternoon, King Obiora summoned Chidera to the royal audience hall. General Azeobi stood beside the throne. Queen Obianuju sat quietly beside the king. Adago watched with a knowing smile. The king looked at his son. "Chidera, father, you wish to marry Urenna?" "I do." The king's expression remained serious. "Then remember this. The crown does not give you permission to ignore tradition." Chidera immediately bowed his head. "I understand. You are a prince." The king smiled. "But before you become her husband, you must first become a respectful son before her parents." A smile spread across Chidera's face. "I was hoping you would say that." General Azeobi chuckled. "I trained him well." The queen smiled knowingly. "That," she replied, "he learned from his father." The king laughed. "Prepare the royal convoy." He rose from his throne. "We are going to Umuokoro." 2 days later, the people of Umuokoro could scarcely believe their eyes. The king himself, the queen, Prince Chidera, Princess Adago, General Azeobi, royal elders, council chiefs. They all entered the village not with soldiers ready for war, but carrying gifts: palm wine, yams, kola nuts, fine fabrics, coral beads, livestock, everything required by tradition. The entire village gathered beneath the great udala tree. Mazio Keke sat upon the elder's mat, Neka beside him. Urenna remained inside her mother's hut according to custom, her heart pounding so loudly she wondered if the entire village could hear it. Outside, King Obiora rose. "My friend," he addressed Mazio Keke with deep respect. "I did not come today as your king." He smiled warmly. "I came as a father." The elderly hunter nodded. "I understand." The king continued. My son has spoken. He tells me your daughter possesses courage. General Eziobi smiled. She does. He tells me she possesses kindness. The queen herself answered. She does. He tells me she possesses wisdom. Princess Adago laughed softly. She certainly does. The king looked toward Chidera. My son, it is time. The entire village became silent. Prince Chidera stepped forward. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the crown prince of Alaezi knelt before Maziokeke. A collective gasp swept through the gathering. Maziokeke immediately shifted uncomfortably. My prince, this is not necessary, Chidera smiled. Today, I am not kneeling as your prince. He lowered his head respectfully. I kneel as a man asking permission to spend the rest of his life protecting your daughter. Even the village elders wiped away tears. Neka quietly covered her mouth. Maziokeke looked toward his wife, then toward the king, then back at the young prince kneeling before him. Finally, he smiled. My son, he said gently. You asked for my daughter. He looked toward the doorway of his hut where Urenna stood listening. But I learned, long ago, he chuckled softly, that daughters are never ours to keep forever. He turned toward Urenna. My daughter, come, slowly. Urenna stepped out. Her childhood friends, Amaka, Ijoma, and Chisom, walked behind her, each struggling to contain their joy. Chisom whispered with a grin. I told you one day a great love would change your life. Amaka laughed. And you threw a stone at him. Even Ijeoma, usually the calmest of the three, couldn't hide her smile. The entire village burst into warm laughter. Urenna covered her face in embarrassment. Chidera smiled at her with the same gentle expression he had worn the day they first met in the Whispering Woods. And for the first time since that unforgettable encounter, she laughed about it too. For 7 days, the kingdom of Alaezi celebrated. Never in living memory had the palace witnessed preparations so magnificent. The royal courtyard was transformed into a garden of color. Long streams of white and gold fabric fluttered from carved balconies. Thousands of fresh flowers from every province filled the palace with sweet fragrance. Giant clay pots overflowing with palm fronds and lilies lined every walkway. Across the kingdom, no household was left out. By the king's command, food was prepared not only for the palace guests, but for every village in Alaezi. If my son rejoices, King Obiora declared, then let the kingdom rejoice with him. The people answered with thunderous cheers. Inside the queen's chambers, laughter echoed through the morning. For the first time in many months, Urenna laughed without fear. Around her bustled her 3 childhood friends. Amaka held up another wrapper and frowned dramatically. No. Meanwhile, Chisom stood quietly behind Urenna, fastening the final coral beads into her hair. She caught Urenna's eyes in the mirror, then smiled. What? Urenna asked. Chisom shook her head. I was just remembering. Remembering what? The day you insisted that no prince would ever make you leave the Whispering Woods. Amaka burst into laughter. You actually said that. Urenna covered her face. I was young. You threw a stone at him, Amaka added between laughs. And then argued with him? Oh, it was glorious. Amaka grinned. Our brave Urenna nearly chased away the future king of Alaezi. The room exploded with laughter once again. Even Urenna could no longer pretend to be embarrassed. She laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. When the laughter finally settled, Princess Adago stepped closer. She gently took Urenna's hands. Her smile became softer. My sister. The words caught Urenna completely by surprise. I've never had another sister. Adago's eyes glistened. But today, I gain one. She embraced Urenna tightly. The room fell quiet. Amaka smiled. Ijoma lowered her eyes. Chisom discreetly wiped away a tear. Some moments were too beautiful for words. Outside, the palace drums began to sound. The ceremony was about to begin. Prince Chidera stood beneath the great royal canopy wearing flowing ivory robes embroidered with gold thread. The royal coral crown rested lightly upon his head. General Eziobi stood proudly at his right, King Obiora at his left. The old commander leaned closer. Nervous? Chidera smiled. A little. General Eziobi chuckled. I've seen you face charging horsemen. I've seen you face assassins. I've seen you face my training. He grinned. And this frightens you? Chidera laughed. I'd rather fight another battle. The general laughed so loudly that even the king shook his head. That, the king said, is the wisest thing you've ever admitted. The palace horns sounded. Once. Twice. Then a third time. Every guest rose to their feet. The great doors slowly opened. Sunlight poured into the royal courtyard. There, walking between Queen Obianuju and Nneka, was Urenna. A collective gasp swept through the gathering. She seemed less like a village maiden, and more like dawn itself. Her ivory gown was woven with delicate golden patterns inspired by the leaves of the whispering woods. Layers of coral beads rested gracefully around her neck. Her hair was adorned with tiny white flowers from the very forest where she had first met Chidera. She looked breathtaking. Chidera forgot to breathe. General Eziobi smiled knowingly. I've seen that look before. The king laughed softly. So have I. When Urenna reached him, neither spoke. They simply looked at one another, remembering the stone, the forest, the arguments, the laughter, the tears, the war, the promise. Every step had led them here. Finally, Chidera smiled. You look beautiful. Urenna laughed softly. You clean up rather well yourself. The entire courtyard laughed. The royal high priest stepped forward. Before the vows could begin, King Obiora raised his hand. There is one more duty. He beckoned Maziokeke and Nneka to stand beside him. The king looked at them with deep respect. Many will remember today because a prince marries. He shook his head. I will remember today because two parents raised a daughter whose character reminded this kingdom what true nobility looks like. He bowed his head before them. The entire palace gasped. A king, bowing before villagers. Then, one by one, the queen, Princess Adago, General Eziobi, the royal council, even the assembled nobles followed. Not because of wealth, not because of rank, but because honor deserved honor. Maziokeke stood speechless. Nneka's tears flowed freely. And somewhere among the crowd, Lady Somtochukwu watched in silence. She finally understood. The throne had never been won by beauty, or birth, or ambition. It had been won by character. The wedding celebrations continued long into the night. The palace echoed with music. Traditional dancers from every province of Alaezi performed beneath thousands of glowing lanterns. Children laughed as fireworks painted brilliant colors across the evening sky. For one night, the kingdom forgot sorrow. But dawn always brings duty. The following morning, the great council hall filled once again. This time, there were no wedding songs, no laughter, only justice. The king's throne stood beneath the great carved lion of Alaezi. At his right sat Queen Obianuju. At his left stood Prince Chidera and Princess Urenna. General Eziobi stood before the throne. The royal council occupied their seats. Village elders, including Maziokeke, had been invited as honored witnesses. Even Emeka stood proudly among the guests. Near the center of the hall, Prince Obinna waited quietly. He wore simple white robes. His hands were no longer bound. He had surrendered freely. He would receive judgment as a prince of Alaezi. King Obiora rose. 25 years ago, my brother left this palace believing he could save Alaezi. His voice echoed through the chamber. Instead, his choices brought suffering to countless innocent people. He looked toward Obinna. You have admitted your crimes. You have sought neither excuse nor escape. Obinna bowed his head. I have not. The king continued. The law demands punishment. A heavy silence followed. The man before us is my brother. His voice grew firmer. But today, I judge him only as king. No one moved. No one breathed. After a long pause, the king delivered his judgment. Prince Obinna, you are stripped of every claim to the throne of Alaezi. Obinna nodded quietly. You shall never again command soldiers. You shall never again hold political office. You shall spend the remainder of your life at the sacred hill of Nukwu Udo, serving the people you once failed. You will oversee the rebuilding of every village destroyed by this war. You will build schools. You will restore farms. You will care for widows. You will feed orphans. You will seek forgiveness. Not with words, but with the rest of your life. Tears filled Obinna's eyes. He knelt. Thank you, my king. No, King Obiora replied softly. Earn it. General Azeobi stepped forward. There remains one final matter. The great doors opened. Lady Somtochukwu entered. She still carried herself with dignity, but beneath her calm expression, fear lingered. She bowed. Your Majesties. The queen looked at her with deep sadness. Somtochukwu. I trusted you. Silence. You attempted to divide this family. You manipulated royal servants. You concealed information. You encouraged suspicion. You placed your own ambition above the peace of this kingdom. Somtochukwu lowered her head. Every word was true. At last, she spoke. I have no defense. The hall fell silent. I loved him. Her voice trembled. I truly loved him. She looked toward Chidera. But somewhere along the way, my love became possession. When he chose another, I chose bitterness. Tears rolled freely down her face. I became someone I no longer recognize. Queen Obianuju slowly descended from her throne. She stood before the young noblewoman. I do not doubt that your love was once genuine. She sighed sadly. But genuine love never demands another person's freedom. Somtochukwu closed her eyes. I know, the queen continued, for your actions. You are removed from the royal court. You shall surrender every title and privilege attached to your office. You will return to your family's estate. You shall not return to court unless invited by the crown. A long silence followed, as palace guards escorted her toward the doors. She paused. She turned one final time toward Chidera and Urenna. Then, she bowed, not to royalty, but to the couple whose forgiveness she knew she did not deserve. Without another word, she walked away. No one stopped her. No one mocked her. Her greatest punishment would be living with the consequences of her own choices. As the council came to a close, King Obiora looked across the hall. For too long, we believed a kingdom was protected by walls. He smiled at Chidera and Urenna. We were wrong. A kingdom is protected by the character of its people. General Azeobi lowered his head. Maziokeki smiled quietly. Emeka placed a proud hand on his father's shoulder. Amaka, Ijeoma, and Chisom exchanged joyful glances from the gallery above. Princess Hidalgo reached for Urenna's hand and squeezed it gently. Outside, the palace bells rang. Not for war, not for mourning, but for a new beginning. And somewhere beyond the palace walls, the whispering woods waited patiently, as though they already knew. Their story was not ending there. Several weeks passed. The kingdom of Alaezi flourished once more. Fields that had been blackened by war were green again. Children's laughter returned to village paths. Markets bustled with merchants. Hunters walked the forests without fear. The scars of war remained. But hope had become stronger than memory. Prince Obinna had already begun his sentence. Far from the palace, at the sacred hill of Nukwu Udo, he worked beside ordinary villagers rebuilding homes with his own hands. He asked for no special treatment. He sought no praise, only redemption. General Azeobi finally retired from active command. The old warrior spent his mornings teaching young recruits not merely how to wield a sword, but when not to. The greatest victory, he often told them, is the battle you never have to fight. His words became the first lesson every new soldier learned. Princess Adago laughed more freely than she had in years, and beside her stood Urenna not only as her sister-in-law, but as the sister she had always hoped to have. Amaka remained exactly as lively as ever, filling every celebration with laughter. Ijeoma, calm and wise, was appointed to help oversee the education of young girls in the villages, believing that wisdom should belong to everyone, not just the privileged. As for Chisom, she never let anyone forget her favorite prediction. "I told all of you." She laughed whenever anyone would listen. "I said every young maiden is destined to meet a great love." The others never allowed her to become too proud. And we also remember, Amaka would tease, that Urenna's great love began with a flying stone. Even Queen Obianuju laughed whenever the story was retold. One quiet afternoon, Chidera found Urenna standing beneath the palace balcony. "Ready?" he asked. She smiled knowingly. "I've been waiting. Without royal escorts. Without drums. Without ceremony." The two of them mounted their horses and quietly rode toward the Whispering Woods. Only General Ezeobi knew where they had gone. When the old commander heard their destination, he simply smiled. "Some journeys," he murmured, "belong only to two hearts." The forest welcomed them with the same gentle whisper of leaves that had greeted them months before. Sunlight filtered through the ancient iroko trees. Birds sang from hidden branches. The familiar stream flowed gently over smooth stones. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. They dismounted and walked together until they reached a small clearing. Urenna stopped. She smiled. "I know this place." Chidera looked around. "So do I." She pointed toward an old tree. "You were standing there." He laughed. "And you were hiding behind that bush." "I wasn't hiding." "You were. I was observing. You threw a stone at me." "I did." "You nearly hit me." "I was aiming for you." They both burst into laughter. The laughter echoed through the forest, carried gently by the wind. After it faded, Chidera bent down. Among the fallen leaves lay a small, smooth stone. He picked it up, turning it thoughtfully in his hand. Then he placed it gently in Urenna's palm. She looked at him curiously. "The first gift you ever gave me," he said with a smile, "was a stone." Urenna laughed so hard that tears gathered in her eyes. "I was trying to chase you away." He shook his head gently. "No." He took both her hands in his. "You were leading me home." Silence settled between them, not awkward, not empty, peaceful. The same breeze that had whispered through the trees on the day they first met danced softly around them once more. Chidera looked around the forest. "This place changed my life. It changed mine too," Urenna whispered. He smiled. "Then let it never again become a place of fear." Several days later, by royal decree, the Whispering Woods was declared a sacred forest of Alaezi. No village would be displaced from it. No army would march through it. No fire would be permitted to destroy it. It would forever remain a place of peace, protected by the crown and cherished by the people, not because a prince had once walked there, but because it had reminded an entire kingdom that love, courage, humility, and forgiveness could grow in the most unexpected places. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the trees, Chidera slipped his hand into Urenna's. Together, they began the walk home, not as a prince and a village maiden, not as a king and a queen, but as two hearts whose story had begun with a single stone and had grown into a love strong enough to heal a kingdom. And if, on quiet evenings, travelers still pass through the Whispering Woods, they say the wind carries gentle whispers through the ancient trees. Some believe they are the voices of the ancestors. Others believe they are simply the forest singing. But those who know the story smile and say, "No, those are the whispers of two hearts that found each other here," and reminded Alaezi that the greatest kingdoms are not built by power, but by love. The whispering woods are quiet once again. But perhaps, if you listen closely, you can still hear their story. If you enjoyed this tale, subscribe to African Flavor Folktales and join us for more African stories filled with love, mystery, courage, betrayal, and redemption. What story should we tell next? Leave your answer below. Until then, listen closely. The next story may already be whispering.
While the ancestors watch from above, the forest whispers every name. No heart returns the way it came. When duty calls and love stands near, only the brave can conquer fear. Oh, hear the royal horns, hear the spirits sing. A kingdom waits for its rightful king. Alaezi, Alaezi, Alaezi. The drums are calling through the night. Hold your heart, hold your hope. Love is stronger than the fight. Stand together, do not run till the rising of the sun. Though the shadows hide the way, love will see another day. The hunter walks through fire and rain. The farmer bears another pain. A mother's prayer, a brother's hand will lift the hope of all the land. No crown is forged with gold alone. A king is known by love he's shown. When darkness covers earth and sky, the fearless never say goodbye. Beat the drum, lift your voice, let the whole wide forest know. Truth will rise, hope survives like the mighty rivers flow. Alaezi, Alaezi, Alaezi. The morning breaks beyond the storm. Every tear, every scar